My name is Jill, and I'm doing a review of my personal process with fasting and ketosis as it relates in a practical application to both a famine or a food shortage survival scenario. So, while not exciting, as most people are focused on losing weight, I'm really interested in this as a strategy of things that may come, just take a look at Venezuela. So this is technically a review for days 9, 10, and 11. And so I'm feeling better. The last video I was a little bit over the edge. So we're picking up from the last video. Days 1 through 8 or 1 through 7, I have, I reduced carbohydrates, and then I did pure fasting. And then day 8, I put a few carbohydrates back in because I felt so bad. I needed to figure out what was going on. And then on day 9, I experimented with doing a higher protein, no carbohydrate, medium fat. What's interesting about that is that actually knocked me further out of ketosis than I did on day 8, where I had more carbohydrates and more fat. And so then day 10, I needed to restabilize because I had another bad day on day 9. And day 11, we're moving forward with kind of a new plan. So the reason I'm doing this is I'm learning a lot as I go, and I'm afraid if I don't make these little videos on an ongoing basis, I'm going to lose a lot of this material. And so, what happened for me on day 7 is when I went to a fasting state, I pushed my body into a high level of ketosis. So I was excreting a lot of ketones, but I'm not adapted yet. So it's still a bit of a struggle. So in doing some more research about that, I learned a couple things, as usual, what I did wrong. But the most important thing I've learned in this process so far is one, you really don't want to be doing this in a crisis scenario. Things that I've noticed is the first week, and I'm still getting my brain back in focus, is my problem-solving skills, my patience. My creativity is completely gone. I couldn't even make videos that weren't anything other than talking head. And my coping skills were highly reduced. And so there's really an initial foggy period. As I mentioned in the first video, under an acutely stressful situation, your adrenaline is pumping, so you'll have a little bit more function and clarity than you do when you're in a non-stressful situation. But the problem with acute stress, which I didn't mention before, is as your adrenaline peaks, eventually you crash, and then you crash down way lower, and then you're really at a deficit. So even though it's a short-term survival method, a high adrenaline state, you don't want to sustain it because the longer you go, the bigger the crash. And if you don't do proper recovery, if you don't rest and recover from those acute stress states, you just make things a lot worse. And so the other thing I learned that you peak and you crash with is how much this affects your hormones. So what's been most interesting for me in these last few days to learn about is the impact of ketosis and fasting on hormones. And it's obviously way too big to go into here, and I'm still on my learning curve, but bottom line, if you're a young man, and a healthy young man, you can do whatever you want. If you're a healthy young woman, you really need to pay attention if you are pregnant, wanting to get pregnant, or want to stay sane, because it's just going to jack with your hormones more if you don't know what you're doing. If you are a woman that is in a hormone crisis stage, like entering puberty, perimenopause, premenopause itself, or postmenopause, the act of this fasting and the ketosis actually crushes your estrogen and your progesterone. So if you're, in the later stages of life and you're not estrogen dominant, meaning you're not carrying a lot of extra weight because estrogen lives in your fat, you're just going to make things worse, apparently. So that I think has been part of what's been going on. My estrogen and progesterone, my female hormones, are already pretty low. What I'm doing isn't helping, and so it's a very different protocol, and you just have to have more carbohydrates if you want to stay sane or not stress your body further. Now, the act of fasting for men actually can increase your testosterone, but in women it can suppress your testosterone. And this doesn't even have anything to do with people who have a specific medical condition and or if you're in a fragile state. And so my takeaway from all this complexity is, one, again, nobody knows what they're talking about. Everybody is an expert, has a different opinion and a different area of focus. And my biggest complaint that I have right now, there's a few people I'm picking that I think I really like their style, but my biggest complaint is that when you don't have personal experience, you're often speaking to the name of the problem from a clinical or a statistical perspective. I had a long history in the healthcare profession, and one of the things I learned is that nobody likes to listen. They just want to hurry up and get on to the next problem. And patients have a lot of difficulty expressing clearly what's really going on with them. So that's a really bad situation. You have healthcare professionals that are in a hurry and they don't want to think about it, and the Western medicine, everything's a category, it's not a whole picture person. And then you have people and patients who don't know how to be clear in a short amount of time about specifically what's going on with them. So it's a pretty dangerous combination is what I learned. But that being said, it was really important to self-educate. And so as I'm watching all this information, we've gotten to the point now where the average lay person is speaking in such clinical, complex terminology. I actually know what most of the words mean, and I can barely follow what they're saying. So just because somebody's talking to you in a complex language with chemical processes and, all these different chemical reactions within your body, and or speaking about how you should feel as a woman or a man or somebody who's in a healthcare or has a chronic medical condition. Most of those people have never experienced that, and probably my biggest complaint with all this right now is there's a ton of young men talking about this stuff, and premenopausal women. And so while I appreciate your efforts, if you haven't lived it, you have no idea what you're talking about. And so, because I'm seeing this repeating pattern saying, oh, women are fine. Oh, women can do whatever they want. And then when you go into the comment section about women who have been trying to do this, my hair is falling out. I have no energy. I mean, there's all these, I can't sleep at night. So there's all these contraindications from people having that experience versus the advice in the video itself. The practical application to that, then, not just in the calm everyday scenario, you want to sort this stuff out while you're relatively stress-free, you have access to information. But here's the bigger takeaway that I really am getting from this. If us are in a situation where food is limited, and we're looking at either short or long-term food shortages or long-term famine issues, based on my understanding of what's going on, you're going to want to know how these different states of regular eating, how carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and the right combination, in addition to being a fat-burning, carbohydrate-burning person, those are the two ways we make fuel for our body and our brain. Everybody needs a different combination. So if you're in a family and you have, a 21 and a 25-year-old young man, if you have little children, if you have a prepubescent girl, if you have, an older woman or somebody who's pregnant or somebody who's diabetic, they all need a different diet if you're in a crisis situation to minimize the impact of having the food shortages or metabolic problems that come from an erratic eating pattern or limitations. So I think that's a very important thing, because it's not about what you eat or how much you have to eat. What's important to remember in a crisis situation or a long-term stress situation is your body is utilizing calories and chemicals in a very different way. And as I have witnessed for myself these last few days or this last week, there's a lot of impact to my problem solving, to my patience, I talked about lost my hand dexterity there for a while, for my fogging. I haven't been able to sleep. The 2 nights that I moved into a higher ketogenic or higher protein, lower carbohydrate, lower fat. I had a weird thing go on with my sleep. And this is, some of this is new information for me because I haven't thought about these things. But it really hit home. If you're in a crisis, you would be optimizing people's ability to function in that crisis by distributing the food not by calorie but by macronutrient and its effect, because those macronutrients are affecting our hormones, and our hormones are going to be driving a lot of our physical, mental, and emotional processes. So that's just the latest little recap that we have here. I'm going to keep going with this, but I am learning a lot, mostly that nobody knows what they're really talking about, and they're all kind of doing the best they can. And the second more important thing is if you're interested in this, you need to do it when it's not stressful, because if I was trying to do this right now and cope without access to the internet to answer some of my questions, and having a high stress load in terms of danger or having to do a lot of physical work, I would be in a lot of trouble. So this is a luxury. I feel grateful that I can explore this process when there's a calm version of life going on. And I will caveat that. And I tried to do some hardcore fasting last year in summer, and I picked the end of June because typically I don't eat a lot when it's really hot. I couldn't do it because of the excess heat. So extreme climate changes, whether it's super hot, super cold, that is going to affect how you process these macronutrients, what your hormones are doing, and how your body is functioning in a chemical way in terms of holding on to sodium and potassium, etc. So we're not going to do all that here now, but the bottom line being, there's a lot to learn. There's a definite practical application to this. And it's really not about just losing weight. It's about the experience of how you're using that food as fuel. So we're taking a much different look at ketosis fasting and intermittent fasting here in this process. So with that, we'll see what happens in the next time.